without further ado, play my shit! Whoa.
What's up guys, T-Croc here, welcome to the vlog. As I said in the previous video, I was going to install the motor the next day, so this is me putting the motor in. I had to do it by myself. Ideally, I wanted to get the car on a lift and basically drop the motor in from below. It's a lot easier to do it that way, but since it's busy at the shop and I didn't have a lift, I had to opt for the typical way and using a cherry picker and basically installing it by myself. It is a lot easier if you have the cherry picker where you can kind of tilt it and turn it, but I don't have that option. I have just a regular standard cherry picker. So my piece of advice is to get the trans angled and drop it all the way down to the ground and then kind of turn it. That way it's basically lined up with all the mount brackets, and then jack it up. For me, what works easiest for me is to take another jack, and once I have it almost lined up, is to jack it up and for the trans bracket to go in first. So I'll try to line it up and jack it up so the trans mount goes in, and then I throw a bolt in, and then I'll do the same for the rear. Just make sure you put like a piece of wood under the jack, that way it doesn't dent anything. For me, like I said, I've pulled and removed and dropped in probably like 3 or 4 motors in this car, and it's been all by myself. Only one time I needed help, and that was dropping it from below. So I mean, if you take your time, it's really easy to do. Just take your time, make sure everything is disconnected. Personally, I like to remove the alternator, and I take off the power steering pump, but I leave that in the car or in the bay, just because it gives you more room and clearance. I don't attach exhaust manifolds or anything like that. I wait, because the less you have on the car, the easier it is for you to get the motor back in. So I basically just, whatever you saw in the previous video, from the intake manifold to the fuel rails, that's all I had connected to it, and that's what I dropped in. So a lot of people say, well, if I have a GT and I want to swap a GTS motor in, what can I do? You can swap a GTS motor in. There's no problem with that, but you just have to remember, you can't use the mass airflow sensor unless you change the settings in the ROM, which I'll get to later. And you can't use the intake manifold because it has the butterfly valves, and you don't have the window switch like the regular, because the GT doesn't have the window switch in the ECU. So you would have to use a different intake manifold, 6074, 6075, or you can use your stock intake manifold. I personally use the 6075, and I use the combination with that, the S90 billet throttle body. It's just a big upgrade all the way around. You don't have to go that route, it's up to you. So basically I'm waiting on a few parts. Fuel fittings should be here later this week. Also, once I got this motor installed, I realized that my exhaust header combo that I use, that's made for the 3.8, did not fit the 3.0. So I am in desperate need of a solution. I did find a couple of things that I'll try, and we'll talk about that later in a couple of the videos. But right now, I do not have an exhaust set up. So distributor should be on its way as well. And the last thing I'm waiting on is some fittings, because I don't run a heater core. So I have to take some A&N fittings and basically loop it and recirculate it. So if you didn't know, the water neck has coolant that flows to your heater core, and I don't have a heater core because it's a track car, so I have to figure a way to loop it. So once the motor was installed, I figured I would just do some side projects, and I'm going to talk about using ECU flash and what I have to do to convert it back from my 3.8 tune back to a 3.0 tune. Alright, so I'm pulling up ECU flash right now because the original tune that's on the car is for a 3.8, and I'm gonna have to swap over to a 3.0. So I gotta change my injector scaling, my injector latency, the timing maps, the fuel maps, and the MAF airflow sensor map as well. So I'm not sure if you guys can see it. It's kind of hard to basically zoom in. I'll see if I can re-edit it and zoom in on the when I edit it. But so I'm basically pulling up my old ROM that I have for the 3.8, and then I got a spare ROM from a 2005 GT, I believe. It's not a GTS, but the only big difference between the GT and the GTS is the mass airflow sensor. I'll explain that really quick. The mass airflow sensor on the GTS is a lot bigger. When I edit this, I'll actually like throw up a picture so you can see the difference between the GT and the GTS. If you didn't know, you can use a GT mass airflow sensor, GTS, or a Evo 8, and I believe an Evo 9 as well. The Evo 8 and the Evo 9 and the GTS mass airflow sensor are basically almost the same size. It's like a bigger mouth. You guys will see it in the picture. But if you do change over to one of those, you have to change the scaling in ECU Flash. So when I get to that table, I'm going to change that over. But for right now, I'm going to pull up the fuel maps, high and low. High octane fuel map is basically the one your car runs on. And the low is basically like a counter. Let's say if you have a lot of knock while you're driving, it will go to the low octane fuel map, which is like a little bit richer, so it doesn't blow your motor. Also, your timing map is the same way. It's got two maps. It's got a high and low, and the same thing. I think if you get a knock count of 4 or greater, then it will convert to the low octane to counteract the knock, and then it'll go right back to the high octane. So if you're tuning and you see that, then you have to adjust your high octane map so you don't run into that issue. But there's always a buffer and a cushion so you don't blow your motor. So your low octane is going to be a lot richer, and your timing is going to be more retarded. So retard the timing more. So that way it's trying to save your motor. So let me copy and paste. Alright, so that's my low. Alright, that's the high for this map. So let's copy and paste this one. So it should be really similar. And I'm using the base maps. Over the winter, I'll probably retune it and be a little bit more aggressive. Typically, these maps that are made for the car from the factory are really rich, and it's just for a save point so your car doesn't get, basically you don't blow your motor. Alright, so that one's good. And let's see, that's my low. Let's go to low here. And as I'm looking at this map, like, it's incredibly richer than what I was using on my 3.8. So it can be a good and bad thing at the same time. It's going to be more good to not blow the motor, but bad because it's gonna rob me of power. That's why you'll see a lot of factory tuned cars, and then they go and get tuned and they gain like almost 10 to 20 horsepower. It's because from factory they're just made really rich. Okay, so that one looks good. Alright, so let's go to injector latency. So now that I'm running the 3.0 injectors, I gotta change the latency and the scaling. So let's pull those up. And I know a lot of guys ask, hey, do you get any benefit from running bigger injectors? The answer is no. Unless you get a bigger motor or anything in like that nature, or you can just do straight bolt-ons and you don't need to upgrade the injectors. So stock injectors were 273 and I'm going back down to 220. So you can just edit that. And I'm not going to go into the details of like how to tune with ECU Flash. There's a bunch of how-tos on the internet. There's one that basically, if you go into Evo forums, they basically walk you through everything, and you can just, It's granted it's for Evo, but if you just apply it to this, it's the same thing. Alright, so it looks like the latency is almost the same as up on this side. So I'll copy all those over. Alright, let's pull up the timing maps on this side. And I know for a fact the timing maps are not as aggressive on the 3.8. I'm just organizing it so I can see what I'm doing. Alright, so these are the ones I want to change. Like, for example, the time map I'm copying over right now, the peak is 26 on the regular 3.0 GT, and on my 3.8 I was running a timing of 23, so 3 degrees less. And another reason why I'm not flashing over the this 05 GT ROM is because my distributor is a single pulse. I mentioned it in the other video, but I'm just going to reiterate that is one reason why I'm doing it this way. And also, if I do, when I boost it, I can use the 01 patch that can read boost, so I don't have to switch distributors like down the road. Now, I don't have a GTS file on hand, so for the math smoothing and math scaling, I had to pull it up on the forum because they actually had the numbers. So I'm gonna do a jump cut on the video edit because it's gonna take me a while to key these numbers in, and then I'll show you the difference between the 482 math is GTS and the 399 is the Evo 8 math. And the regular GT map is a 501. If you look on top of the math airflow sensor, it has the numbers right there. So I'm gonna pause the video real quick. I'm gonna enter these numbers and I'll show you the difference. Okay, so it took me a minute to plug in the numbers because some of the numbers weren't making sense, but I got it all set. So this side right here is GTS. That's the GTS smoothing, that's the GTS math scaling. Now, this is why you can't just automatically swap over. You see how this looks a little bit different? It's because the numbers are greatly different. I find it odd that the actual scaling on the GTS is a lot bigger than the regular 501 GT math, but the smoothing is a lot smaller compared to the GT, and I'm not sure if that's just how the airflow, because the air horns are bigger, but I'm gonna triple check and pull up. I couldn't pull up a GTS ROM on this laptop, but I have another laptop that I can probably pull up a ROM on just to triple check, because yeah, the smoothing kind of threw me off. So this is why you just can't swap maps and think you'll be okay, because you're going to be entering more air and your ECU can't compensate for it unless you put the numbers in. So that's really it. I'm actually going to save this. And I'll just show you guys. Let me save this. And let's see. Let's close out this 01. Because everything else was swapped over. Timing, fuel, injectors, and the map. That's the only thing that I had to swap over. And everything else will stay the same. So we're going to save this ROM as this will be, you can see all the ROMs that I've used from supercharged to boosted. Let's just save this as GTS base. And I'll put a question mark because I want to triple check the scaling. So wait, save. So while that saves, I'm still waiting on a few more parts, and I am also waiting on the confirmation of my new exhausts, or headers I should say. So that's it. Figure out, throw this video out really quick instead of you guys waiting a week later and I make a really big video. So I'm gonna try to keep these short, sweet videos, and that's it. So I'll see you guys in a week.